Welcome to this high-level overview of the Matrix Gemini Biobank Manager. This system has been installed in many biobanks around the world and can assist your facility to comply with ISBER best practice recommendations. This video will provide an introduction to Matrix Gemini Biobank Manager and will run for approximately 5 or 6 minutes. When we log into the system, every user has a username and password. This allows you to restrict access to certain parts of functionality within the system. And it also allows you to audit every action and link the audit records again back to a user via the user code that was used to log on to the system. What we see when we first log on is our workflow screen where we can register some samples, or we can view samples at various statuses within the system. We can access our sample storage area, some management type options and some configuration type options. We'll go through some of these in a bit more detail later on, but we'll start with registering a sample. So the sample registration screen that you see can be configured to meet the requirements for your individual biobank. So the fields that you see on the screen right now would be configured with you when you implement this particular system in your biobank. For this particular setup, we can select a study, and we'll see that there are some default sample types that we collect with this particular study. And there's some fields we have to fill in. Some fields are already defaulted, and we can change those if required. For example, if we receive the whole blood sample in a different type of tube, we could change that option there. All of the fields are barcode compatible, and we can also fill in some patient and consent information on the right hand side. It may be that you keep your patient and consent information in a separate system, and if that's the case, then we would interface to that other system if that is a requirement for your particular biobank. In this case, we are going to say that this particular patient has consented to all studies with a date and time tag for the consent record. Okay, so those samples have now been registered in the Biobank Manager system, and they'll appear in the Receive Samples area. This lists all the samples in our biobank that have been received but not yet stored or processed. On the right hand side, we have several options that we can access. For example, we could perform some testing on the samples, we could create an aliquot or a subsample, and it's important to point out that when we do aliquot samples that the full genealogy is retained, so you can always track which parent samples the aliquot was derived from. I'm going to now take you through the sample storage area within Matrix Gemini. So through this button here, what we can see here on the left hand side is the hierarchy of our storage locations in our biobank. And again, this is completely definable by you, and everything that you configure within Matrix Gemini is handled through our unique configuration tools. And you do not need to access the core code or be a programmer to configure this system. It's very quick and easy to configure. Let's have a look in the main storage area where we can see we have several fridges and freezers. In this particular fridge here, we have a 96 well plate, and when we select that plate, we can see all the wells there, and we can see that some of those wells have samples in them. If we select a sample, we can see more information about that sample at the bottom of the screen. We can choose to store some other samples on this particular plate, and we have the option to drag and drop samples onto the plate, or you could fill the plate with a barcode reader. We can also set up some rules around what types of samples can be stored in particular storage locations, and we can also set some restrictions around what container types can be stored in particular locations. For example, there may be certain container types that are not compatible with a liquid nitrogen storage vessel, for example. Some other handy features of this software include the Shipments module. So we can track when samples have been shipped out of our biobank through this screen here. So for example, let's look at all the received out shipments, and we have one here that has been sent to Dr. Mary Smith. We can see the samples that were in that shipment, and we can look at the history and the events around that shipment. So we can see the date it was shipped and the date it was received, as well as some condition information. We can do some auditing on our storage locations. So this would be for things like checking label integrity and checking that samples are in fact located where the Biobank Manager thinks they are. And if a sample has failed, for example, the barcode may not be readable, what we can do is we can create a kappa action through this button here, and this launches our corrective action module where we can track the issue and make sure that it is responded to appropriately. We can also look at the environmental monitoring module where we can monitor locations for things like any build-up of bacteria or mold, or we can track things like temperatures and to identify hotspots in fridges. So in this particular fridge here, we have a sample point that we are monitoring through our environmental monitoring module. We can see it's the top shelf in the back left corner. We can do some trending on the results for that particular sample point, and if we notice anything that needs to be followed up, again, we can launch our corrective action module and track the issues through that module. We also have an instruments module where we can track all of our pieces of instrumentation in the biobank, so fridges, freezers, as well as testing instrumentation if relevant. And we can see if those fridges and instruments are in service or out of service. This particular fridge here is out of service. We have some maintenance and calibration actions that need to be performed, and that fridge will not be able to be used by the biobank staff until those actions have been rectified. So this has just been a very quick introduction to Matrix Gemini Biobank Manager. For more information, please see our website. We do have 2 case studies available, plus more detailed information in the industry's biobank section. And if you're interested in learning more about Matrix, please get in touch with us. Our email address is info@autoscribeinformatics.com.